And welcome to another edition of the Nerdy Agent Podcast. I'm your host, Luke Pettersen, with my brothers and fellow nerds, Josh and AJ. Today we have sound effects that we just found on here, so you might hear a little bit of applause after somebody says an awesome intro or makes an awesome joke.
I think it's gonna be hilarious when it's just like on video on YouTube and you're just holding that thing in your hand.
I'm a little disappointed with the fact that me and Josh cut out our long and intro with you.
Yeah, we had remember we were doing it before.
Didn't I do it?
No,
you did it.
You did.
I just
but
did it.
But we didn't like do the perfect harmony, brothers perfect harmony.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that was a thing.
Hashtag band back together.
That would have been funny, but I wouldn't have played the funny laughter soundtrack because the people actually wouldn't have thought it was funny. Does that make sense?
That's super fair.
Bad dad jokes. So that's off topic. Today we are going to essentially just discuss what agents should be communicating to their clients as far as the lawsuit information goes, kind of where we're at in that process, what you should be saying to people when it comes up, because we've had personally a lot of conversations about this, and I don't know how they have felt, but I felt like how I've communicated it has came across pretty well for clients, and by the end of the conversation, they're mostly just like, sure, that makes sense to me. We'll figure out kind of what's going to happen in the future as more information comes about from it. To start, super fast, in about 3 minutes, can one of you recap the 4 points of the NAR settlement? So NAR settled, what was it, like 3 weeks ago, a month ago? About a month ago with the home seller plaintiffs, and they agreed to 4 things in that settlement. Can you hit them?
I can think of 3.
Well, the first one's the money.
The money, $418 million from NAR. Multiple brokerages already had previously settled their liquidated damages or dollar amounts that they were paying. More recently, Compass has settled. Real settled yesterday. EXP is still yet to settle. I think it was like 6 cases that got lumped together into this. The second one is when these go into effect, which is expected to be middle of July, buyers can no longer tour a home without a buyer representation contract with the agent who is showing the home if the agent is expected to receive compensation as part of the transaction. It also must note the amount, whether it's a flat dollar amount, percentage, whatever, up to what the agent could receive as commission in selling a property to that buyer.
They can't receive more than that. So the key there is if you put 2.7% of the purchase price in your buyer rep contract and the seller is offering 3%, you can only receive the 2.7.
That's correct. And there will no longer be unilateral offers of compensation to buyers agents posted on the MLS. So that field will disappear entirely. And
this is all assuming this is the final product that goes through the court.
This is what the settlement is in there. Yep.
What's the 4th point, Luke?
Well, the third, I just want to clarify on the third, or any reciprocating websites. So if Zillow says they're going to come out and start posting the offer of compensation for the buyer's broker from the seller, the MLS can no longer syndicate those listings to Zillow. Correct. It's specified in there, which was a good addition because that's exactly what I thought the first thing that was what's going to happen. And so I read the settlement. The fourth item I'm actually telling people doesn't. It's more so just the NAR saying, hey, we want to still be able to do this. It just says that on the MLS, they can still offer seller concessions towards buyers' closing costs. So how I explain this to people is sometimes you'll have a listing, it's been on the market for 2 months, and because the carpet's crappy, so in the remarks, the agent will post, seller is willing to give $5,000 towards buyer's closing costs to replace the carpet. They'll say, towards a 2-1 buy down, towards something else. That can still be offered within the MLS. Great job, AJ. You explained those perfectly.
Thank you.
Go team go.
Isn't that fantastic?
That's so good.
It's so good. We need to figure out how to customize these buttons, Haley, so I can get the exact ones. We could maybe add a few. 4 might not be. That'd be a really good one.
That would be a good one.
Good job, Josh.
We could have a soapbox one too.
A soapbox one would be good. Okay, so those are the 4 hitters. The biggest thing that Josh explained, which is super important to note, none of that is official yet until we have a stamp by the judge saying this is what's going to happen. So these items could change.
And the big thing now, and I sent this to Luke this morning. I don't know if you read that guy.
I haven't had a chance yet.
But the Department of Justice has been after NAR for quite a long time. There's been several cases over the past 20 to 25 years. In 2020, I think, which was after this lawsuit went into play, right? It was 2019, I think, when the lawsuit started. The Department of Justice says, we want to look at this too, this antitrust thing. And they said, we want you to change these 6 things. I don't know what all 6 were. I do know one of them was that the seller doesn't have to offer anything to the buyer's agent, so they could offer 0. So that became available around this time. But they asked for 6. The NAR said, we will do 4 if you close the case on the other 2. They all signed a contract, agreed to it, whatever. 8 months later, they said, whoa, we actually want to open this back up again in 2021. District Court said no on appeal. And then after the settlement was reached, they said, we want to look at this again. And now a 3-judge panel approved that appeal on a 2-to-1 vote. And DOJ is looking at everything again. So I don't know if that's to change this lawsuit, to muck it up and change court dates so that they can get their opinions in before the judge decides what to do. But they are after this case as well. And so, like Josh said, potentially this isn't the end of it. I don't think that a DOJ seems like they're going to make it more lenient than what the settlement was. They're more likely to make it more aggressive. But we don't really know what that looks like yet. So that might be coming too. And I think that's something that, again, Luke, on your topic of what we're talking about today, when you're talking to your buyers.
Let's get to that. Wait.
Okay, go ahead.
So if you're talking to a client, this is what I want to get into. So those are the facts, right? If you're talking to a client and they say, hey, I'm going to list my house I want to list it in the fall. I saw this stuff about the commission lawsuit. Like, can you tell me about it? What's the conversation look like? How are you having that conversation step by step?
So I'm having that conversation with both buyers and sellers today. Yep. I think highlighting on the front end, if you are an agent talking to buyers or sellers, we said this at our team meeting last week, like understand this stuff, because even if you're not talking to buyers and sellers, like I was getting my haircut the other day and the guy was like, hey, tell me more about this lawsuit. Like, you want to be versed in it. And frankly, I've overheard, I was at the Twins game the other day and I overheard someone talking about it and they didn't know what they were talking about. And it was disappointing for me to feel like that person was giving advice when they didn't know what was actually going on in this lawsuit. So actually understand it, read the documents, and be able to converse about it, with information that's helping clients potentially understand what they're going to do. The conversation is a little bit different depending on if you're talking to a buyer or a seller. But if we want to start with
buyers.
Yep. Okay, so buyers, what I tell them is right now, there is this settlement that's been agreed upon and is going through a process of being reviewed and will eventually be ruled on. And then at that point, we'll see some more drastic changes likely come into place. I walk them through the history of it a little bit in terms of what happened and what the high-level goals are. So I say, ultimately what happened is the sellers were selling their homes and they were frustrated that they were having to pay buyers' agents to negotiate against them. There was a lawsuit and the sellers won.
I think the other important part was because there's a buyer lawsuit too out there that still has not gotten final word on it yet. There's that part, but there's also the fact that the sellers had to offer the same amount of commission no matter who walked in the door.
Yes.
So that's the heart of those 2 points, right? That they had to offer something. So it's required compensation from the seller to the buyer's agent to negotiate against them.
Yep.
But 2, that they had to offer a unilateral amount that was completely irrespective. Is that a word?
Of who the buyer and
the buyer's agent was. So whether it was a seasoned buyer's agent that really provided a ton of value or someone that provided no value at all, they got paid whatever it said on the MLS.
And theoretically, they would have been happier with a bad buyer's agent than a good one.
Right.
Sure, because they would have been likely to have more things slip through or get a better price or whatever. But yes, it was essentially that's what I try to explain these things as simply as possible to give them an understanding, but also make sure that they know what's going on. So that's where we're at right now. It is currently under review. So I'm not going to walk through all of the intimate details about what could happen, but essentially what they're trying to do is split the commission so that a seller pays a seller's agent and a buyer pays a buyer's agent. That's the DOJ's ultimate goal in what they're trying to accomplish.
Seemingly.
Seemingly, it seems like, yes. So in that case, depending upon when you're purchasing a house, we may need to have further discussions down the road about how I'm being compensated and if it's coming directly from you or if it's something that potentially is coming through the seller's net proceeds. So we will go over that in more intimate detail as we get further into this process. But know right now that if you buy a house 3 months from now, ultimately this could change. I may not be able to show you a house without first getting a contract with you saying, here's how I'm paid and here's how much I'll be paid. As of right now, I don't need to do that, but just know that we will be having further dialogue about this. If you have any questions about it, I'm happy to answer them at any time, because at the end of the day, I want to make sure that you understand exactly what's going on. The same way I want you to understand exactly how this process works from start to finish right away, and how I want you to understand how everything is going to transpire throughout this entire transaction.
The other piece I add on that is, I always tell everybody, I never knew. Like, I've heard misinformation and I've heard the media, like people have talked about it, and I went, oh, okay, that's sure, yeah, right? I've never understood the misinformation on some of these articles until what came out nationally was something that I actually understood, and that I read the settlement and that I knew what actually was going on. A lot of the stuff you're going to read on the internet probably is a little bit, what you would say, like inflated. Sensationalized, right? So we work with the facts. These are the facts. Like he said, we might need a buyer rep contract. We don't know if the sellers are going to pay commissions. We don't know how much it's going to be, if they still do. When we have more facts, I'm going to make sure you know that. Yep. So when we get out, you're going to understand what's going on. The other key piece that I try and slip in there for people, and I believe this for us and our group at least. So if you don't believe this for where you're at currently, it might be time for a switch, or it might be time to become more knowledgeable. I'm going to know what's going to happen when it happens, like right away. We're going to understand when they stamp this off. We're going to understand the possible implications, and we're going to be able to advise correctly on that. Yep. So you're not going to be in the dark. You're going to know exactly what's going to happen, and I'm going to let you know that.
And I think a lot of people are asking those kinds of questions. And to Josh's point, and to your point too, Luke, I think just talking about the facts of the case, and not in a legal way, but just here's what it says. I can read you exactly what these practice changes say. Is important, because ultimately at the end of the day, once it's approved, stamped, and it's happening, they're going to change the forms. The MLS is going to look different. And the consumer is going to choose what happens.
Yep.
And I think there's a lot of people speculating, but I think it's important to understand that ultimately it's going to be consumer choice. So I'm even like, I talked to a friend who owns a business today, and just, he didn't know anything about it. So I explained it to him, and I said, what would you do if you were in my shoes? Like, how would you move forward as knowing you're a consumer? How would you move forward from my position to create a valuable business and a valuable offering to consumers? Because I think that's ultimately the people that are first to do that are going to be the winners in all of this.
Yep.
Because everybody else, there's me so many people, and if you read the comments, there's so many people that are like, nothing's changing. It's going to be exactly the same. And I think the one thing that we could agree upon when we're talking with buyers or sellers is things are going to change.
Yeah, I think to draw an analogy, changes. Right? We just had 10 days of spring break. It just ended. Last night, my kids, both of them, were like, I'm not going to school tomorrow. No school, right? Like, I've had 10 days off. I want to stay home. This is fun. And I said to them, like, guys, like, I know you don't want to go back to school tomorrow, but I don't control whether or not that happens. School is happening when you wake up in the morning. That is just the structure of what's going on. That is what is going to happen. Whether I can control that or not, that's what's happening tomorrow. Even if you don't like it, it is still going to happen. You can have your own internal emotions about it. You can feel like it's not fair. You can feel like you're misunderstood. You can feel like you're misrepresented. Whatever you want to feel about this is totally valid and yours. But failure to adapt and adjust to the reality that you're not in control of necessarily what's going to happen will be a bad thing to do, right? Like, you need to be thoughtful about, even if you don't like this, you can't ignore the fact that it's happening. And you need to figure out ways to be in the right place to be successful once it does. Because people are still going to transact real estate. It's not like people are going to stop buying houses. Our role in that will change, and maybe what we're compensated will change. And maybe more people will, and maybe how, or there's a lot of things that will change, but that doesn't change the fact that you're not in control of it. So you need to think about what's going to happen and learn to be okay with adapting and adjusting to that.
So let's move on to sellers. So two scenarios, let's say, because I actually have an interesting one, but someone's saying we're going to sell in the fall. First scenario. Second scenario is like, I have a listing contract with somebody right now that's going to sell probably in September. We already have a signed listing contract, which I'll get into in what I told them yesterday. But what would you say to a seller?
Well, first off, if you have a signed listing contract, I would say, I'm not sure if this is even going to be a valid contract when we get there.
It's funny that you say that. So what I said was, hey, just so you know, this is what's going on. We don't know what's going to happen. When they have the rubber stamp, I'm going to basically be on top of it and know exactly what's going to happen. What you should know from me is that I don't think that, like, I'm not going to tie anybody into a contract. So if tomorrow every single seller on the market stopped paying a buyer's commission, we're probably not going to.
They would have new contracts anyways, and they'd validate anything.
Which is totally fine. But I just said, like, even if this contract was valid, like, I'm not just going to force you to offer a buyer's agent if nobody else is. We're going to have that conversation, see what's going to make your house the most competitive and make you the most amount of money, because that's what matters to me.
Yeah, at the end of the day, again, the consumers will choose, and the net to the seller when you're representing them is the number one most important thing that you have to protect. You do everything you can to make them the most money possible.
And by the way, if you have a signed contract with that seller, it's not because you're trying to do your job. It's because you have fiduciary duties that you actually owe them legally. So
I hope that's in every state, but it is definitely
in Minnesota. You do. But I just want to make that, like, it's not, you're not just trying to get them the most amount of money because you're good at your job. Like, you actually owe that to them.
Of course.
Yes. And I think, having that conversation, like Luke said, the market's going to dictate how this all plays out. And there might be markets where the commission payouts are exactly the same. And maybe there'll be ones where it's more or less or different or zero. I think we're going to be the ones that are going to be on top of tracking what's going on and understanding how that is evolving and changing. And the DOJ thing could throw a huge wrench in it anyways. So making sure that you're on top of it. And specifically, I think having these conversations, like Josh said, if someone asks, have the conversation with them and know what you're talking about. If you have a buyer or seller, just preemptively do that.
Be transparent about what's going on.
I met with a new buyer who's buying in September, and I said, here's the deal. When you start looking for homes, I'm going to have a contract signed with you that spells out how much money I could make up to. We can't even see a house without that. It's a government mandated thing. It's not my requirement. It's the requirement of this settlement if approved. So just know that that's coming. I have no idea in your price bracket and area if the sellers are going to continue to pay a buyer's agent commission or make it negotiable. I don't even know if it's going to be legal for them to offer it. So just know, again, to Luke's point, I think the biggest thing is I'm paying attention. I'm going to be on top of it. I'm going to have all the information for you faster than anybody else will. And people will feel good about that.
I think one key thing, and I've seen obviously agents posting online about this too, but as you communicate with clients, to AJ's point about this being consumer driven, try to take your own personal, like, defensiveness emotions out of the conversation, right? You don't want to talk to a buyer and be like, yeah, you're going to have to pay me. It's stupid. Or no, they're definitely not going to, the industry's not going to change because we're valued, or like any sort of like negative connotations or like dismissiveness is unnecessary and not helpful for you. So even if you're feeling that, try to find agent friends that you can vent with, but like putting it out online is not helpful. And putting into conversations is not going to be helpful in terms of your ability to negotiate or to discuss this with clients.
If it's the same, goes back to everything when we're representing clients that I talk about with the team all the time. If it feels self-serving, it 100%. Probably is.
But like, think of how many agents have been online being like, here's the deal. The reason why buyer's agents are worth 2.7 is because then they'll come through your house and then you can create more competition and then you can drive the price up. So tell your seller clients that you should pay the 2.7 because it's going to bring as many clients through the door as possible. I mean, it's very self-serving, right?
Be careful. Yeah.
I've seen agents on Facebook groups like post into like a real estate Facebook group that just said like, well, why don't we just tell all of our sellers that it still makes sense? And people come and go, that is the reason we're in. Please remove this. This is the issue. We cannot collude on the back end about artificially raising the commissions.
I had a lender I was talking to the other day saying all the agents should just band together and tell every buyer or every seller that they need to pay this. And any agent who takes on a listing below that, they should just like blackball from the industry. I'm like, that's a huge no.
It's so bad.
Huge no.
So bad. It's exactly why we're in the predicament we're in.
It is.
But like, I guess, so I explained to sellers, like, once again, the goal is to come across with high-level overviews, with facts, without emotions, and to give them options. So, like, I would still talk to a seller and say, it is true that today, even before this goes into play, you could offer a $1 buyer's agent commission.
$0.
Now it's $0. It was $1 before, though. But, like, it was stupid that it was ever forced to be $1.
It was dumb.
But there are options today that are almost identical to theoretically what the new state would look like. Know that could impact how buyers would perceive your house, because a buyer then would probably have an agent that would say, you will need to pay me directly, the same way that they may in this new environment that we're going to be in. And they might say, I don't have that money, so therefore I'm not going to see this house, or I'm going to offer less on this house, or something may change. And part of what you may be trying to accomplish, depending upon which house you're selling, what price point you're at, is to create as much competition as possible. And that commission may be driving some of that competition. So an option for you would be you can pay zero and just make them pay it out of pocket, or you could offer a buyer's agent compensation package that may create more competition and drive more buyers through your house. Those are your options. You have the ability to make your choices. If you want my opinion on what I think is going to be most competitive for you in this specific scenario, I'm happy to provide that. But I'm not going to push anybody into anything, especially right now. I would never do that, but like right now, even more cautious about doing that. But I do also think it's important to help them understand, because what they're reading is like sellers won't be paying commissions anymore. That may or may not be true, right? And you can kind of not pay commissions today. So lay out the information and tell them, here's where we're at, and here's your options in terms of what you can move forward with.
Before we wrap up, do you have anything? No, nope. I just want to wrap up. So
that's great.
I mentioned earlier, and we talk a lot about understanding the information, being knowledgeable, and being the one who can bring that to them in real time. A couple places, if you feel like you don't have the information, or if you're just listening to us, you don't know where else to get any, the two that I would suggest would be Tom Ferry. He did a 2-part series on what this settlement was about. The second one is BAM Media. If you look them up on YouTube, they do really long podcasts, live YouTubes, even an hour-long talks. They've been talking about this since it came out. They're very smart. They're very knowledgeable. Their term is be the knowledge broker, which I love, which is fantastic. But that's all we have today. This is
or the Nerdy Agent Podcast.
This is
your other place you could get all this information.
Well, you'll get this here, but you can find it other places as well. I wanted to plug them because
or an advisory team meeting.
Exactly. If you're looking for a switch on a team that has this knowledge, we are available. Reach out to us.
Come hang.
That's all we have this week on the Nerdy Agent Podcast. And as always, and more importantly than ever, remember, be better.
Goodbye.